I recorded a video about this book a year ago, in fact. I'll put this side. I can never remember which side to do that. You'll have seen the thing pop up if you want to go and watch that video. I talked about it as a homework assignment for a YouTuber course with Ali Abdal, and it got some really nice feedback, and it was at that time when I decided that I was going to record more content around the idea of recovery, and I have done that. I've recorded every week pretty much since, and it hasn't always been about recovery as such. It's been about life after addiction, which includes stuff like going into the hills, which is a thing I get to do at weekends rather than lying in bed with a hangover and looking forward to my next drink. But what I thought I would do is just start going through this book and reading it out onto camera and offering commentary when things arise, because I'll be honest with you, I haven't been to an AA meeting in quite some time, and making content helps. It really does. It helps me to remain focused on my recovery, but you know, I miss the literature. And of course I'm free to read the literature anytime I want, but I just think that making content around the literature would help me even more, and might help someone else who's out there suffering right now, because it was this book that helped me. You know, the first time I got into AA, someone handed me the book, and I remember reading particularly the doctor's opinion and being like, oh, okay, this resonates. So without any further ado, let's get into the doctor's opinion. Right, you ready? Here we go. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specialising in alcohol and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. To whom it may concern, I have specialised in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. Over 100 others, yeah. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, M.D. The physician who, at our request, gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, we favour hospitalisation for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. The doctor writes, "The subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have realised for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has laboured long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while on the firing line, see the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even of their sleeping moments, and the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel, after many years of experience, that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable and discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, "Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me." Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favourably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape, they were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue the fight. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions but never a decision. There is a type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic-depressive type who is, perhaps, the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognised his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but he was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed, with no return to alcohol. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and, in a desperate condition, brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he come to scoff, he may remain to pray. William D. Silkworth, MD. I see Mary Spender has disappeared from my screen behind me there. So that's the doctor's opinion from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a lot in here I can relate to when it goes through the lists of different kinds of alcoholics, and it talks about the manic depressive, about whom a whole chapter could be written. I think I fall into that category. This is something I've come to understand over 16 years of sobriety, that depression has been part of my life. I think I've been medicated now 3 times through my history, both in drinking alcoholism and in sober alcoholism, twice in sobriety, and the manic part of it I can relate to as well, where some days I struggle to get out of bed, some days I'm really excited to get up and crack on with my to-do list, and I feel like nothing can go wrong, you know what I mean? I'm not sure whether knowing that helps. I don't have a diagnosis of that, but I do think that it helps me to understand myself, and when I'm feeling the urge to self-harm, which is a word I didn't used to use about myself until quite recently, when I feel the urge to self-harm, which I tend to do by not exercising when I know I should, more importantly by eating things I shouldn't because I'm diabetic, and I turn now to sugar as a means of self-harming. When I'm feeling those feelings, I need somewhere to turn, right? I need some solace. I need help. And sometimes being on my own just doesn't work. And when I'm feeling like that, that's all I want to be, is on my own. I don't feel like having any kind of companionship, really. And so I will wallow, lie in bed, hide, watch TV, binge watch stuff, just not crack on with my day. And, you know, there have been times when I've been able to get out, to drag myself out of it, to go and do some exercise, to do something, to read, to make content. This is what I'm turning to now as a creative outlet, which is what this channel's about, really, if I'm honest. It's about finding an outlet for me to sit down and just talk through my feelings openly and honestly and candidly, and publish them, because then I feel that somehow I'm being more honest. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, back to the doctor's opinion. The other thing it talked about in there was the phenomenon of craving, about being irritable and discontented. What was the words? It's left my head because I'm sitting on camera now, but this is famous AA words. Oh, I'm sure it was near the bottom. Here we are. Restless, irritable and discontented. So I can relate to that in a very big way. And when it talks about the craving, the phenomenon of craving, when it kicks in, about the person who has a meeting scheduled and everything's going well, and then they take a drink and miss the meeting the next day because the phenomenon of craving kicks in. And that's very much how it was for me. I had no mental defence against the first drink, so I would pick up somehow believing that it was going to be different, and then the craving would kick in and off we would go to wherever it would be, usually blackout. And that craving was so intense, and I still experience that a little bit today when I pick up a biscuit from the tin, or a cake, or whatever it might be, or even if I just have toast, because I follow the low carbs diet, so I manage my sugar levels that way. And sometimes if I just have a piece of toast, then my brain will trick me into thinking, well, you've messed up, you might as well go and take your wife's chocolate out the fridge and eat it all. So that can happen, you know, and then I go to bed feeling terrible and that I've failed for the day and all that stuff. So, yeah. So, I don't know, maybe you can relate to some of this, you know. Maybe you're sober, but you still self-harm in ways that surprise you. Or maybe you wish you were sober, but somehow you keep picking up. And then the craving kicks in and you find yourself off on a binge, you know. Or maybe you feel alone and depressed and dark. And sometimes you just don't know where to turn, so you pick up a drink because it makes you feel better. Or at least you think it will. These are all perfectly normal things for people to experience. The problem with the addict, or the problem with this addict, is that, you know, the phenomenon of craving always took over. And now I'm trying to find a way in life where I can become the person I want to be, and I'm becoming aware that that's not the case in so many little ways. Crazy little things like, you know, walking the dogs today, this morning, and I was walking down, turning into the little pathway where I normally walk, and there was some waterboard people in there digging up the pavement, and I was like, God damn it, how dare they, you know, this is my path. And I was like, wait a minute. I've just finished reading The Power of Now. I'm trying to learn to accept things as they are. I'm trying to be grateful for what I have in life, and yet here I go, you know, the ego taking over, thinking that if only life would be if people would just act in the way I want them to act, you know, and that's not who I want to be. I want to be a person of love. So I'm becoming aware of all of that now in ways which inspire me to change my thinking. And this is where the content comes in. I'm making content now around this idea. I'm writing, I'm making videos. I'm using those outlets to try and become the person I want to be. So I'm going to do that by being honest about the times when I'm failing, about what those failures look like, and about how hopefully through prolonged creativity I will start to see some success, and maybe you could follow along. Maybe you could find some success as well by following along, or by starting to do something similar yourself, you know. When I said writing, I've got my newsletter which goes out every week, at least it has done for a few months, usually on a Monday, which you can find at camscampbell.com. I've recently joined a writing group where we get to publish safely and have each other's work critiqued. So I'm looking forward to growing into that safe space and using that as a place to publish more, and to growing into becoming a sober guy who loves humanity. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Though the aggregate of recoveries